We are live. Morning report. Bad idea.
Apparently.
I'm not really awake. I stayed up watching that HBO series. Oh, here we go. ESP, you know, that whole fiasco with Ellison Mack and all that. You heard about that, right? This cult.
No, I know about a lot of different cults, but I mean, once you've seen one, you've seen them all.
Oh, this one is really interesting. The documentary is like incredible. There's 7 episodes so far on HBO, and I couldn't stop watching it. Just like, what the hell? Pretty bizarre. Anyway, so I was talking to Standing for Truth about cults this morning. I told him that his creationism is a cult.
Oh, yeah.
And he claims that it has, you know, that people have always been creationists, that they've always thought the earth was 6,000 years old.
No.
That's what I thought. I told him to give me references, you know?
Yeah, that you can go back to like early church history, and they did not believe. Like, very few people thought that the earth was like actually 6,000 years old.
Well, who's that dude that did the calculation?
Usher.
Yeah, okay. So he was in when?
And he did it incorrectly as well. He added the math wrong.
Yeah.
He took numbers from the genealogy accounts in the Bible and added them to try and arrive at a final tally for what the age of the earth should be. That ignores the fact that those dates may have been used as symbolic, maybe used as being symbolic, because those cultures may have a very specific perception of numbers and their relevance at that point in time for their culture. But also the fact that when the Bible is talking about like genealogies, it may not be referring to them in a linear fashion. Like, it may not be listing like every individual generation between like Adam and Noah, for instance. There might have been 20 differences between Adam and Noah, but because Adam and Noah were very significant figures historically, it simplifies it in saying the first generation was of Adam, you know, the first ancestor was Adam, and then Noah, and then yada, 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 yada.
Yeah, and I don't think it was a big deal in the religion. It wasn't a point of contention until they started fighting with science. Trying to make it a point. So anyway, I told Standing for Truth he belongs to a cult, and I think he does. It's a crazy cult, and they're running rampant on YouTube, and it's our job to correct them constantly. So anyway, and then I got a request that we look into Sadiba, that video that he did recently. But that's kind of like Walker's wheelhouse, you know, and Erica.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I'm not an archaeologist or, you know, like huge into like human evolution.
Paleontologist, and that's a problem. That's something I'd like to correct, but it's just not, you know, not what I'm particularly doing. So anyway, what else is going on? So Saul Cordova is back twice, like in 2 different videos, and so he's apparently come back to surface, which is cool, because Saul has points you can argue, unlike a lot of them. Standing for Truth has points you can argue, but he tends to have too many of them. He gallops, right?
Yeah,
he's a little more different.
Points quite quickly.
Yeah, Maddox and SFB Mod Notangelo, they really don't have any points other than Factory couldn't, you know, they do the Gosh gallop. Standing does the Gish gallop. Saul Cordova is actually kind of a serious person to argue with, because he comes up with one particular thing and you can work with him on it. So I don't know. Anyway, so it's encouraging. Hi, Lori, Icarus, Minnie, Karen. Oh my goodness. Edward, Nathan, epistemology and gaming. Is that new? New guy? Anyway, so I don't know. What else is going on?
No, not a clue.
You got nothing other than your vegan argument.
Well, that's personal, yeah.
Yeah. I think farmers treated their cows very much like Buddhists treat human beings. That they don't have this clinginess to life lasting forever. And so when you raise a cow, you really get to like them. I mean, you work with them every day, you interface with them. They're like cats, like pets. And and I've done this. I've actually lived through this. And then you bottle feed the calf, you raise it up, you take care of it, you milk it, whatever. One day you kill it and you eat it. And it just seems like a real natural flow of things. So coming from a farmer mentality, the actual where I can remember the smell of the blood and the whole thing, I have a very different idea than a lot of vegans do. So I don't know. But anyway. Episto dude, like and subscribe. Speed could drop down. Yeah, right. Yeah, subscribe, man. I'm not long for this world. It's happening. Anyway, so I have been getting into this complexity. What is it? I keep getting the name of the book. I'm reading the book, Origins of Order, and getting into these NK landscapes and protein landscapes. And he's got some very, very, really, really good explanations. And the idea is, well, what this is, do you see the picture I've got up here?
Yeah, the little hills and valleys and stuff that's going on.
So this is a morphogenetic landscape, which basically has like traits, like if you went from, say 17 up here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. So 17 would be like a fin and 15 would be a limb. And, to get from one thing to another, you kind of got to go down into these valleys and then back up these hills. Well, if you get down, like if an organism gets down into the blue area of the valley, then it's dead. Basically, it's made a change that, it will not survive. But if it stays up here on kind of on the green slope, it could possibly cross over from one valley to another very gradually, by making changes. But
so go back to the first one for a moment.
I don't know how the hell I went to the second one.
But so like the challenge, like for some organisms in evolution, so if like the red parts, the red and or orange parts of those peaks are like the maximum fitness.
Right.
So I guess the like the challenge in terms of like evolution for some organisms is finding like the path of least resistance between like the apex of one hill to another.
Yeah, and it's done by a random walk. And there are many different random walks you can take between one and the other. But a couple key points to remember is that you don't have to be on these red peaks or the orange peaks, or even, you could be down here and by chance, enough of the organisms could survive that genetic drift will fix that trait.
So I guess an important question would be, like, suppose you are like in one of those areas where there's a red peak or an orange peak. Would that be more energetically costly, like in terms of the needs of the organism to sustain that kind of role? As opposed to like if you're more moderate, like in the orange or yellow or green areas.
That is a really good point, and that shows you how complex all this can get. Because if they're cooking at maximum speed, it may be better for them to take a more moderate path on that slope. But then they would be less adapted. They would have less offspring. They would be less likely to get to the next generation. But the other thing you have to understand about evolution is if you look at this whole map as a rubber sheet on top of a bunch of humps, okay, as the ecology changes, as other organisms change, and starts like some predator comes into the situation, this landscape is going to change. So the rubber sheet is going to be distorted into a different kind of landscape. So now when you were down here, close to the blue, all of a sudden you may be at the peak. So you may be the one that gets the most offspring because the landscape has changed. So this thing is constantly undulating through time and changing.
So essentially, like what you're saying is, can you drag your cursor like towards like one of the red peaks?
Yep.
Or towards one of them? Yeah. So I guess like one of the interesting points to consider would be, suppose you choose to study just one of those like maxima at the peak, like one of the local maximums, right?
Okay.
It'd be in an evolutionary context. I mean, you have environment, but you also have predator and prey that are interacting in a very complex way. But it would be over the course of like these interactions and interactions both like with other organisms and the environment, which they're related to each other.
Right.
Does that peak like remain stable over time? Like, does that peak, like, okay, it may not be optimal in all situations, but over the course of like millions of years, like, does that morphogenetic role and the fitness associated with it tend to maintain a maximal value, or does it dissipate over time?
It depends entirely on the trait. There are some organisms that will stay in stasis with certain traits for tens of millions of years. I think that happened around the Cambrian. There were some trilobites, stuck around for like 30, 40 million years, something like that. And they kept that same trait, but then all of a sudden they fucking went extinct, just suddenly.
Yeah. And so like what I can tell from this, I mean, is that you're looking at a three-dimensional plot. Yep. I mean, and you're just considering like the effects of two variables and the fitness that's some function of it.
Yep.
In reality, right? I mean, the real world, like this actually, like being a full model would include like thousands upon thousands of different variables like that are contributing to fitness.
Right. So it would be a n-dimensional. It would be like not a three-dimensional like we're looking at. It would be like hundreds of thousands of dimensions that we can't.
It'd be a hyper-complex space.
And we can't imagine that kind of a graph. So what we have to do is get our minds around these simple graphs and then extend it and then with mathematics alone, we figure out the more complicated graph.
Well, and also, right, consider that like what we were saying earlier, right? It's possible like that one morphogenetic rule or quality of an organism has a direct influence on like the abundance or proportion of the other. So
right,
there's not just independent contribution like between variables. The variables may interact with each other.
Yeah.
And as a result, like you thus need to generate a rule for how these variables interact with each other and change over time.
And becomes even more complicated. So that is an NK landscape. And that's the part that I'm working on right now to understand thoroughly, and not ready to talk about it yet. But that's where the traits interact with each other. But going back to this, just for anybody that is listening and wants to know, this like 17 could be like, okay, suppose there is a white squirrel. And white squirrels can find each other easier and they mate more. So white squirrels have some trait, something about being white allows them to, maximally reproduce. But then along comes a new kind of bird into the territory, and all of a sudden being a white squirrel slides you way down the hill here. Right. And now being a gray squirrel, even though being a gray squirrel before you were down here, now all of a sudden gray squirrel's going to be climbing up, So I mean, the landscape can change is what I want to get at.
So another like kind of interesting point, I just realized this too, is that like natural selection, if you think about it, it kind of takes this like weird bent and like convoluted sheet and essentially kind of shapes it. It causes these peaks to change in some weird way, but it changes all peaks simultaneously. It changes the value of those peaks in some complex mathematical description.
Yeah, some amount. Yeah.
But what's also curious is that like with the case of artificial selection, it seems to be kind of a different process because say you put your cursor on peak 17, right? And that's a morphogenetic trait you want to manipulate. So if that thing were, or actually peak 4 might be better example. So that's not a peak 4.
Peak 4. Okay, where the hell is 4? Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah, that's
so,
pretty smooth.
Yeah, so that's very smooth in terms of its landscape, but you might want to raise that. You might want to have that be a trait that's more that's higher in expression in some organism, and so by doing that, like by manipulating the expression of that particular gene, you might cause other local maxima to dissipate. So peaks 20, 14, and 17 might have a reduction in terms of like the intensity and fitness.
Yeah, this is rolling like an ocean, like waves on the ocean. But then the other thing is this whole graph can bifurcate. Like, okay, if a river cuts through the population, cuts it right in half, then and then one side of that river has a predator and the other side doesn't. Well, now we have two completely different graphs for these two areas, and that's going to change, and that's going to cause speciation. It's all of a sudden 17 is going to be low and 4 is going to be higher, and this thing is going to develop the 4 trait, whereas the original population is going to stick with 17. So that's how speciation happens by what is that? Allopatric speciation, they call it, where it means other speciation. There's another group that is separated and evolves separately. So all of a sudden we have.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to see like the actual science and like mathematical description of these, quite obviously like very complex topics.
Yeah, and they deal with graph theory, and it's called like a random walk, and you figure out, how many steps you have to take to get from one to the other, what the statistics are. There's just, the math is incredible.
Well, yeah, and I mean the natural question of, suppose I take a finite sample of random walks, right? So perhaps I take 10 million random walks that are completely randomly generated. Of those 100 million random walks that are performed, what fraction of those random walks, what fraction of those random walks from one peak to another are minima, right? So how many of them essentially, how many of them like take the least time or cover the least distance in terms of whatever unit is being assigned to that rule?
Yeah, and these high peaks, like if they stay constant, like if the system stays constant for millions of years, then you're not going to see a lot of evolution. These guys are going to keep kicking ass. They're being the A team, right? But then if it changes, then they're forced to change with it. So it kind of happened many times. But now, okay, we're looking at traits, like fins and limbs and shit like that. But we can also look at proteins and an enzyme function. So now pretend these are proteins.
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes very complicated, and the graphs kind of look peaky like that.
Oh yeah.
Or like this is an enzyme function, but this is a totally different function over here, and another different function. And if sometimes if you change one amino acid, it quits working entirely. But for many other amino acids, you can make that one change and it won't have any effect at all. So it has kind of a flat top with peaks and sharp valleys. It becomes very jagged. And they're looking at the amount of amino acids you can change to not only keep this protein working the same or this enzyme working the same, but sometimes it'll make a change that'll end up way over here on another function, right?
Yeah.
So if that protein duplicates and then starts to modify, you can end up with a drastically different function. Now, the creationists will tell you that, you have to multiply, you have to consider this totally random. Well, it's not totally random. Every step of the way has a point on this path where it's either working or it's not.
Yeah.
And if it's not working, then that organism doesn't survive and those genes don't get in the future. But if it is working, it can slowly modify over time until it ends up with a different function. And then if you have a number, thousands of these enzymes all working together, you have the possibility, and I'm going to get into this in a little more detail, hopefully in a simple way. There are pathways. There are like logical pathways, like these little, you can write a little program. If we have too much of this enzyme or too much of this sugar, then it will make this enzyme produce more, and that will make another enzyme produce less. That'll make another enzyme produce even less, and that'll make some gene shut off, basically. And it'll feed back and increase the amount of sugar. And so there's pathways. But when you have all these different like enzymes that are like pseudogenes and enzymes that aren't really doing anything, like the neutral theory is that you have this big bag of tools that aren't really doing anything yet. But if you shuffle them around long enough, they very easily hook up and do something. And the creationists would have us believe that, oh no, that is impossible because they think the space between these peaks is really small, is really large. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
they think it's impossible to get from one function to another. Well, knowing a little bit of chemistry, we know that's not true.
Well, and the thing is, right, like there are some, like there obviously is some credence to that, but not in the way that they think. Like there are certain jumps that are a little too hard to make in one step.
Yes.
But the important aspect is that for instance, suppose an organism gains a beneficial mutation, but it causes some damage to another gene, right? Well, the important aspect in terms of like this fitness idea is as long as that peak is still around, as long as it hasn't lost functionality completely,
yep,
you have an ability for this gene, like over the course of random walks, to achieve fixation. So for it to either increase in value or find like some new optimal value now that this other neo-functionalized gene has been introduced into the environment. Because it might well be the case that since this organism acquired a new beneficial mutation, there may not be enough energy for these two proteins to have the same level of influence in terms of the fitness of an organism.
Yeah.
And so one must go down.
Yep. Yeah, so this is the stuff that I'm working on today, a little bit of it. And also I've got to address cell. We'll see what's going on in chat here. Religious nutbutt. Okay, so we're way back. So we got the cult. We were talking about the cult. The tribe, the brotherhood. Go like and subscribe. Let's see how much I missed. Anyway, these guys were talking about, let's see. Okay, so many Karen. Cult is no less a thing than any other scientific term we use. That's a fact. Boy, if you watch that ESP thing on HBO, you get a good idea of how much a human being can be manipulated by just creating these ideas and picking on them. It's just amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Use Christianity to hide behind. Yeah, and then Icarus mentioned that peaks are called local optima and local fitness maxima. Let's see. Okay, true Scoutness. What are we at? They say the Christians. They're Christians. If they suck, tough titty for Christianity. Anyway, let's see. Yeah, they use religion often to hide their bigotry. I guess that's a whole. That's the interesting thing. They found a hill to die on, this creationism thing, which is just. I mean, they have to push back tremendously on all of science everywhere, and tons of people. I mean, all of academia. So they, in a lot of ways, they're trying to get the masses to follow them and mistrust academia. It's almost like mistrusting the media, that sort of thing. And once they build that coalition, then they end up with this. They're in a place where they can judge other people, and people love to judge academics and rich people. So you can see how the forces of a culture, or how they're using cultural forces to create this little sect of young Earth believers, and that's kind of what they're up to. So they're in agreement, but they're still Christians, at least until Christianity revokes their membership. Yes. Can they do that? Can we get them to do that? Can we file a report or a complaint? Go watch Godless Granny's debate on equality in the panel of Joshua's his name. Did you see that at all?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how well we've been explaining like this whole concept of like NK fitness landscapes.
I don't know.
People are just completely fucking lost, or if
the chat has been talking about something entirely differently while we've been talking about it. So
okay.
The problem with Ian does this all the time, and he just shuts off as soon as he sees something complicated. So it's something that he considers not in his field, in his wheelhouse. I think he stops listening to a point. I don't know, and that kind of happens. But I mean, it's unfortunate. But I mean, this is a really important concept if you want to understand evolution, and if you want to understand why Christians are wrong or creationists are wrong, because they don't see this at all. They don't see this complicated landscape.
Demeter wants in.
Demeter? Really? Let me open this up.
11th dimension.
Yep. We're supposed to talk today, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Demeter, can you do it with this link here that I'm putting in chat? Let me know if you can use that, or if I have to email it to you. I can email it to you too. Except I got to do some stuff. 11. It's been emailed also. StreamYard. So this book, it's really interesting. He believes that life doesn't exist in chaos or in order, but it exists at the edge of chaos and order, at the interface between them. And that's why life is so fluidly capable of persisting, because it's on this edge of chaos is what he calls it. And unfortunately, it is a 700-page book.
I don't know. I think life operates chaotically in some fashion. I mean,
yeah, but he's talking about how it builds order, and there's some stuff in here about the second law of thermodynamics, where they, if you add information to the system, you defeat the second law of thermodynamics, and that's what life does. It constantly accumulates information about the environment inside of itself, and yet it doesn't go to a strict order, which would be strict order would be like stasis, where a species stays the same, like the coelacanth, for 300 million years. Whereas most species exist in this state of, they might fall off and start changing, that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, like, organisms don't live in equilibrium. Like, they consistently manipulate their environment to
and each other,
continue producing energy and maximizing the entropy of the system.
Yeah, and then you add culture to this whole thing.
I mean, it's curious though, because life really has learned how to, become a master at obeying the second law of thermodynamics, and the ATP synthesis is a testament to that. Yep. And ATP synthesis is a hell of a process. I mean, it's by no means simple.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to make another comment about something. What the hell was it? I don't know. Lost it. Mine's not working this morning yet.
Is Demeter backstage?
Demeter, he just entered. And
Okay.
Just been added.
Lost it. Mine's not working this morning yet.
That's something.
Hi guys. Hi guys.
Yeah,
Hey,
something.
how are you? I think your the stream is playing in the background.
Yeah, something's echoing back there, Demeter. You gotta shut something off. Okay, yeah, you were playing us. How you doing? We're good.
Yeah.
We're good now. So we're talking about fitness landscapes. I'm looking at this book by Stuart A. Kaufman, The Origins of Order from 1993.
I see. Yeah, I came a little bit later for this particular talk. I didn't catch the beginning of your talk.
Yeah, we basically went over, okay, this is like, these are traits, like phenotypic traits, and this is a fitness landscape, the one that they show to teach you. But then we talked about also proteins have the same landscape, like each protein has a landscape, and if you change one amino acid, you go down one notch. But proteins are more like this, where they have these big flat areas where you can change a whole lot. And to model the those very, very small
Gradations and changes.
I got
how
it.
do you say?
Yep, I got it.
Yeah, not polymers, but oligomers.
Yeah, I think.
Okay. I never know how the hell to pronounce things because I end up learning too much from reading and not from talking to other people. So sometimes you have to correct me in my pronunciation. So anyway, so proteins are kind of more like this, and this would be like, God damn, I don't know why that does that. It changes like an enzyme function from one function to another function, but there's a lot of space in between that it has to traverse sometimes, but not always. Sometimes these peaks are close to each other. So anyway, but by the time you model an entire organism, you have a dimensional space that's about 10,000 dimensions, plus you have 10,000 of these things.
Yeah.
So you have 10,000 graphs at 10,000 dimensions, all interacting. So one thing that Sal Cordova has been working on for the last 9 months or last 4 months is this redefining fitness and going after the Fisher-Wright theorem, which is a very, very simplified model for populations. And he has to understand that the reality of life and the reality of population genetics is nothing like that. So anyway, we're trying to get the audience to listen to us, but they're not fucking paying attention. So yeah, they're talking about something else.
I can see very well the idea of this particular graph, and actually capability to make some sort of mathematical model of the entire complexity.
Yeah.
What I can do, I can speak from the molecular biology point of view, and as I mentioned, sorry about that. Too much coffee.
I haven't had enough.
Yeah. So I mean,
Smokey's here.
Sort of to say that if you just change, for example, if you have enzyme and you change one amino acid, for example, what will happen? And it all depends how important is this amino acid, of course. So if it happened to be extremely important, might shut down the entire enzymatic activity.
Yeah.
However, this is just, for example, if you have, I mean, this is, let me say, roughly average for, let me say you have 300 amino acids in this protein. And
so you have a 300-dimensional space.
Yeah, from these 300 amino acids, probably maximum 5 of those will be so critical, so critical that if you remove it, at least will shut down the activity. And what actually in fact happened, and this is due to the many experiments. I'm talking directly from the kitchen of the laboratories, experiments and papers. Most of the time, even that it's super crucial, some amino acids, if you remove it, you don't shut down everything entirely. You can reduce the efficiency of the enzymatic process, probably to some extent, like 50, 60, even 70% down. But not entirely, not completely. Most of the time, if you remove essential amino acid, you can just reduce the activity, but not kill the enzyme entirely.
Yeah.
And I'm talking only for about 5 of those amino acids as a part. I mean, again, this is statistical representation. It's not exactly every enzyme is different.
Yeah.
But I'm talking roughly, let me say 5 amino acids are absolutely crucial. But all the rest, even if you change the amino acid, most of the time nothing happened. Or it's happened just a little bit.
Yeah, and the other thing, first of all, some housekeeping stuff. Smokey is in the backstage, but I don't want to put Smokey in with you, Demeter, because of its drama. So we don't want you to get into that. But so let's try to finish up this discussion. The other thing, besides enzymatic activity, is the binding of enzymes. Enzymes bind to a substrate. And binding of enzymes is those peaks are a lot less jagged. You can make a lot more changes. So binding of enzymes is a lot less sensitive to making changes in the amino acids. I mean, you can change a few things; it'll still form an alpha helix, and that alpha helix will still stick to the substrate in some ways. So that's important. So I mean, there's more than one trait of a protein that we have to look at. It has to bind to a substrate, and it has to perform the enzymatic reaction. That sort of thing.
The bottom line, is that you can change lots of things. It depends on, of course, the nature of the mutations.
Yeah. Every protein has its own landscape. Very
but
complicated.
Still not to have completely dead system.
Yeah.
And also, as I mentioned the last time, it's important to note the difference between essential genes and non-essential genes. And this is experimentally, again, I'm underlying this notion. It's experimental fact. You have certain number of essential genes, but all the rest of genes are not from the group of the essential genes. So what is the criteria for essential gene? The criteria for essential gene is that if you remove this gene, the cell will die.
Right.
But for example, in mammalian cells, you have approximately about 30,000 genes. And from those 30,000 genes, the essential genes are only approximately 2,000.
Yeah.
So yes, there is essential genes, but see, you have approximately 20, 25, or 28,000 of genes which are not essential. So every single of those genes have a function, of course, and may have effect in a long-term consequence, but that doesn't mean the cell will die immediately. And the organism could be put in a specific new environment where actually the mutation might have benefit.
Yep.
So my point is here, the entire concept for irreducible complexity, it doesn't hold. So according to the irreducible complexity concept, that if everything is so well done, it's so perfectly well done, everything is so well organized that if you just remove one thing, everything will collapse. It's not experimentally proven.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say. And here we are talking for actual experiments, not for just overall principle discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me add to that in this way. It might be the case that over the course of like evolutionary time, that some organisms that have 30,000 genes, as the descendants of those organisms continue to grow and change and further differentiate and evolve, the cost, like the energetic and metabolic cost that goes into maintaining those organisms may prevent the genomic content from being that high. It could be that in exchange for some level of complexity, instead of having 30,000 genes, okay, you can only have 25,000 or 20,000 genes.
Yes. Yes.
So there might be a trade-off in terms of...
Yeah, this book I'm reading, they make the case that the more complicated the organism, the more susceptible it is to these meltdowns. That, the more complicated an organism gets, the more vulnerable it is to rapid extinction events, basically.
Exactly. That
Yeah.
also makes perfect sense, because you have more complicated system, and the essential genes gets higher and higher. So it's not just, of course, the actual number. I mean, there is what is important, the actual number of interactions, which now is dramatically more, hundreds of times more than, I don't know the number actually, but it's a huge network of interactions. And now, if you think about the actual notion or claim from the irreducible complexity creationists claim, oh, you have such a huge network of interactions, and because of this such a huge network of interactions, removing only of one thing, everything will collapse.
Yeah.
But in fact, it's actually opposite. This huge network of interaction actually creates a redundant functions and backup functions. And these backup functions are very clear. I mean, there's everywhere, even in the metabolism backup functions, but it's very clear if you go for repair redundant functions. We see the DNA repair redundant functions almost everywhere.
Yeah, and the other thing with pathways, with biochemical pathways, if you have an enzyme that shuts off an enzyme, that turns on another enzyme, that shuts off another enzyme, those paths, and then you've got a second pathway where it will turn that enzyme on instead of shutting it off. But now it has another insertion of a different step. It becomes the same pathway, so it does exactly the same function. So one of those other things can now mutate and turn into something entirely different, or disappear completely. So the point you're making is that multiple pathways. I mean, there are so many different paths through this network that the life persists, as Jeff Goldblum would say. Life finds a way because there are so many paths.
I mean, not to mention another mechanism which is completely understandable. And for example, because I'm coming from the cancer research area, you can see all over the time when you have a duplication of specific region. And let me assume that this duplicated region survived and goes through the germ cells to the next generation. And it is quite possible to continue this duplicated region to have its own mutational events that will not disrupt its own previous copy. Meaning, once you have amplified material, one of the copy will stay and will harbor the function, but the other will mutate.
Yeah.
And in fact, that might recombine with something else and will create entirely new functional protein. But so the clear examples are all of the proteins which are receptor proteins, for example. You see the same domains everywhere in these receptor proteins, but something else is changed. So it's a recombination of different domains, and still all of those are receptor proteins. And you can even make a phylogenetic tree of those receptor proteins. This is just one example.
Yeah, with G
yeah.
protein coupled receptors, they are important in how we smell things. And various animals have hundreds of thousands of these mutated receptors. And a very small mutation in the receiving end of that receptor can lock onto a different chemical. And now all of a sudden, with one mutation, or duplication and a mutation, the animal can smell something entirely different. And if that becomes survivally, or if that affects its survival, then that is going to be fixed in the population. So you can see how there's this explosion of olfactory receptors because it was very easy to duplicate these things, modify them, and keep adding to them. In fact, I think that's probably a duplication hotspot wherever these receptors are set up. So a St. Bernard, is something that can smell probably a million different things. My St. Bernard he'd go for a walk, and I swear he didn't look at anything. He smelled everything. He smelled his way everywhere, and he would go on these paths, smelling stuff. It's pretty interesting. But I mean, that's just a real clear example. The thing is that the creationists and the people that don't love evolution, they think of these proteins as being like the wrenches in their garage. And if you took your wrenches and you shook them up, they're not going to form a new wrench. But when you take proteins and you shake them up, they sure as hell do form new tools. So proteins and enzymes and all of this biochemistry is more like a Lego set where you can create many, many different things with these very tiny pieces. And that's kind of what this book is about and what I'm trying to learn a little bit more about so that I can get technically deeper into it. But anyway, let's see. So Demeter, we should have, I edited one of our videos and I put it up as unlisted. Mm-hmm. And I've got to watch it and then make it listed. And the other video we did, I've got to edit even more, and that's longer. So I am working on those, but you and I have to do a hangout. Can we do it this afternoon?
Sometime? Yeah, that's okay. I prefer earlier than later because after 5-6 o'clock I have something else to do, and that's it will be not convenient for me.
Would 2 o'clock work? Central? 2 p.m.
If you take a sleep, it's okay with me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. 2 p.m. 2 p.m. would be better because I have to have my mind totally alive for that. But anyway, Smokey was here and he left. Immutable. You're muted. Yeah. Immutable.
Oh God! You don't look at the private chat at all, do you?
What?
I said I'll be right back in the private chat.
Oh, I never look at private chat.
You should see what's there.
I just wanted to ask you to unhide me from. Oh shit! Oh, I forgot that he's hidden.
Oh man!
Showing how well you could have said something. Moronic many is for the no true false equivocation, and just saying it's super coward gutter trash behavior, which this is the kind of shit, Demeter, we get into. I'm sorry, I'll unhide you. Well, how do I unhide him? I don't even know how to unhide him because I can't get at him.
Should be there should be something like a block list on like YouTube that you should be able to check that with. I'm not sure though. Might be under your channel settings.
I was wondering why he wasn't responding in chat.
Let's see, if you go to I'm not sure actually. That'll be something to figure out.
Anyway, okay, we've exhausted this for now for the morning report, but we will get together too, Demeter. And
okay, so Immutable, it's probably it's a good to be also. Danny also. I mean, who was who is interesting in terms of the whole idea is just to discuss the modeling, right?
Yeah, that'd be very interesting because I can imagine. I can already think of like 1,000,001 variables that might be a little
exactly.
hard to maintain.
Okay, 2 o'clock. This is Central too.
Yeah, so 3 p.m. if you're on Eastern Standard Time.
Are you East, Demeter? You're East, aren't
Yeah,
you?
yeah. I just wonder, can you switch it a little bit earlier?
Okay,
I prefer earlier.
1 p.m. Central?
1 p.m. can work.
Yeah, 1
And
p.m. Central is okay.
2 p.m. Eastern.
So, Mike, you probably need to take a nap probably sometime.
I do.
So, yeah, after your nap, we can start.
Yeah, probably 1 p.m. Central would be good.
Okay, let's do it 1
Oh,
p.m.
walking fish. Okay. Let's see. I have a paper that shows, let's see. Simple deletion with an antimicrobial protein is enough to change it to a neural. Cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we'll download that if I can. And put that in the description. So anyway, what else?
Right.
I'm still trying to figure out how to unblock Smokey.
I don't know. I mean,
but he wanted to argue about. I mean, he's coming in hot already, you know. So
he's wanting to argue about all sorts of stuff. He wants to argue about the Cuties movie, and it supposedly supports pedophile propaganda and all sorts.
Yeah, we don't really give a shit about that movie anymore, do we?
I've already had my fight with Smokey, so I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to deal with that now.
Walker's getting tested for the COVID. They're gonna poke his brain with a Q-tip.
Oh no, Walker, be careful.
Yeah,
don't let them give you a wet willy.
That's the reason I'm most afraid to get COVID. You know, death and all that. Fuck. You know, that's no biggie to me. I've dealt with that all my life. I'm worried about that test. I'm worried about that Q-tip up my nose. I don't like pain. I just, you know, if I have a choice between death and pain, I think I'd probably pick death.
Oh wow!
I can't handle it.
We're speed off air, but we're gonna have to look at this whole you and your YouTube channel thing.
Why?
Apparently, you can do channel customization, add subtitles, analytics.
Yeah, we gotta figure out how to get a banner and how to get some music up in here.
I know.
And some good techno is what I want.
We got to find some music that isn't movie you would hear in a porno theater that Smokey uses. With his freaking, with his live streams. I'm sorry, Smokey, but that's what it sounds like.
I like Christian Kraken, the techno music. That's kind of my favorite. Or Insane Clown Posse. I've been trying to get
those are copyrighted.
Well, I've been trying to get a hold of Insane Clown Posse to find out how much they would charge for a 20-second clip, to use it in my YouTube channel. I'm hoping they wouldn't get ridiculous, but nobody's responding to me. Can't get a hold of any of the publicists. None of these music companies, even the ones that list themselves as, contact us so you can buy our music, they don't respond. I don't know what the hell's wrong with them. I don't know. Oh, wow. Mandatory testing at college every 2 weeks. How about that?
Heck.
Yeah.
You have to pin me down.
Yeah, we're up. We're running twice as ever since the beginning or the middle of September. We have been getting twice as many cases every day as in the month or two prior to that in Minnesota. So things are still not lightening up for us. It's pretty bad. Oh my God! So you have people on campus.
Yeah, I've stopped paying attention to what's happening in Florida because Florida is horrible. So
yeah, you're all going to get it. So
yeah, eventually it's just going to be a giant party. So hey.
So are you familiar with Stuart Kaufman, Demeter?
No.
Oh, okay. He's got a lot of papers, and I think he's done a couple of different books. But this Origins of Orders from 1993, and it's kind of like the very much like the extended synthesis for evolution, which didn't really start it. Well, it started happening around 1986, I think. where they came up with this. There's your weird noise again. That must be some kind of a thing at the school.
It's a signal call.
Yeah. So what kind of children do you teach? Like 8th graders, 9th graders?
High school.
High school, eh? Like 11th, 12th?
Yeah, pretty much.
Sort of thing. Yeah. Yep. Hopefully they won't tie you up.
It's the age where they've learned like not to argue back with me, because if they leave me alone, I leave them alone as long as they do the work, or at least as long as I've given them their assignment.
So you have a peace treaty. So
I'm not going to bust my hump trying to make sure that these kids are responsible for their own work, especially like in the next few years they're about to enter like the workforce.
So you're saying that the Brotherhood are tools. Your tool.
Let's save that for Snada.
The Brotherhood, yeah. Okay, so I think I'll end the broadcast and we'll go backstage. What do you think?
I like it.
I think we've done enough damage.
Oh, how many students, Nathan? So far, I've had one today.
Wow, so you like tutor them?
No, I just a lot of the students are virtual, I guess.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, guys, we're going to end this. Hopefully somebody will learn something from what we said about these landscapes. It really isn't that difficult to get your mind around this, and it's important in understanding evolution. So I'm going to end the broadcast. Goodbye, guys. We will see you later, hopefully today.
Okay.